Shabbat Shalom. There is a battle raging across our country today. And I don't speak about the University of Michigan-Ohio State football game. Well, at least not yet, let's be honest. But there is indeed a battle raging across our country today. We've seen in the last week or so the rise of the alt-right. This new term, which I really don't know what it means. But we've certainly seen extremists on the right as the Nazis took over the Ronald Reagan building in Washington, D.C., and actually quite literally held their hands up in a Nazi salute to our president-elect. We ought to be embarrassed. We ought to be ashamed of ourselves that we have created a culture, a climate, in which these right-wing extremists feel empowered to give the Nazi salute and to speak their words of hatred in our country, in Washington, D.C., and to do so in celebration and in open support of a president-elect. And we know in recent weeks the president-elect has nominated Stephen Bannon to be one of his chief strategists. Now, by all accounts, and I've done a lot of reading, Bannon himself does not appear to be anti-Semitic. After all, he's wished Shabbat Shalom to one or two people. But he has, through Breitbart, given forum for misogyny, for homophobia, for racism. We ought to be embarrassed at ourselves for creating such a climate. At the same time, the far left has felt emboldened as well. We know in Ann Arbor just recently, at the University of Michigan, once again the student government had to battle against BDS, the boycott, divest, and sanction movement against the state of Israel. The alt-left also feels emboldened by this climate, and I have no idea what the alt-left means either. Extremists feel emboldened by the climate in which we are. And so we see yet again in Ann Arbor and throughout the country, BDS rearing its ugly head. And while the student government of Michigan defeated it this time, you know it will come back up again. And not just in Ann Arbor, but at every university throughout the country. The extreme left has found a climate in which to operate. We ought to be embarrassed at ourselves, ashamed of what's going on. And now the Democratic National Party is looking at Congressman Keith Ellison to become perhaps its leader. I've done a lot of reading on Representative Ellison. His history is actually with the Nation of Islam, and he was a supporter of Louis Farrakhan. Now, by all accounts, he seems to have rejected that background, and he's actually written a letter of apology. But since then, as congressman, he continually votes against supporting the state of Israel. Certainly with regard to the Iran agreement, though I'll acknowledge that that is controversial even amongst the Jewish people. But he's also voted against supporting Iron Dome, a defensive mechanism to protect the state of Israel. Just as the people on the right have chosen someone of questionable statesmanship to take a leadership role, so too are those on the left looking at someone of questionable statesmanship to take a leadership role. We ought to be embarrassed at ourselves. We ought to be ashamed at what's going on. We look at the different people that those on the right and those on the left are putting forward. We look at the different voices that we're hearing on the right and on the left. And we know that they're not all evil. We know that they're not all good either. So how do we then judge these individuals who are taking or looking at leadership positions within our country? So we come this week to our Torah portion, Parashat Hayyei Sarah. And in recent weeks in the Torah, we've read about Sarah. Now, if you just look at the pshat of the text, if you just look at the basic reading of the Torah, Sarah is a problematic figure. After all, she realized that she and her husband Abraham couldn't have a child. So at first she tells her maidservant Hagar to have a child with her husband Abraham. And sure enough, when Abraham and Hagar have a child, Ishmael, what does Sarah do? She kicks them out of the house. It seems as if Sarah is jealous. It seems as if Sarah has anger issues. If you just look at the pshat of the text, Sarah is hardly a person that we would celebrate as the matriarch of the Jewish people. But yet, when we come to our Torah portion this morning, Parashat Hayyei Sarah, it says that Avraham lispod l'Sarah b'liv kota, that he eulogized her, and he bewailed her, he cried for her. How could Abraham cry and eulogize over such a woman? And so the Midrash comes to teach us that that aspect of Sarah that we read in the Torah is just a small part of who she is. According to the Midrash, according to the rabbis, Sarah is such an incredible prophetess that she actually led pagans to monotheism and then to Judaism. We come to read in the Midrash that Sarah was so holy, she was such a tzaddikus, a righteous woman, that not only did she nurse Isaac, but she actually nursed every baby in the village in which she lived. That's a lot of nursing. But all the women wanted their children to suckle from Sarah, this righteous woman. And so she quite literally nursed every baby in the community. And the Midrash comes to teach that Sarah was so righteous that in the Torah, in our Torah portion this week, when it says that Sarah died at the age of 127, it doesn't just say 127. It says she dies at the age of 100 and 20 and 7. And so from this, the rabbis come to teach about this week's Torah portion, that even at the age of 100, our matriarch Sarah was as beautiful at 100 as she was at 20. And she was as virtuous as she was at the age of 7. That's how righteous our matriarch Sarah is. So here we are now, thousands of years after Sarah had lived. How do we judge our matriarch Sarah? Do we look to the Torah and see her as this woman with jealous issues, with anger issues? Or do we see Sarah as this prophetess, this righteous woman who brought pagans to Judaism, who inspired new generations of the Jewish people, and who was a truly righteous and beautiful and virtuous woman? Which Sarah do we see? Now, our tradition is very careful, and the rabbis in Pirkei Avot actually come to say that it's a mitzvah to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. All of us hang in the balance with good and with negative traits. So what should we do? We give everybody the benefit of the doubt. That's what Pirkei Avot is. And the Talmud actually comes to teach in judging another person. The Talmud asks the question, is your blood redder than his is? Are you really any different than the person you're judging? After all, you have positive traits and negative traits too. Wouldn't you want someone, when they judge you, to give you the benefit of the doubt, to look at your positive traits and weigh those more than the negative ones? It seems as if our tradition, when judging another, wants us to give the benefit of the doubt, wants us to look at the positive. After all, is your blood redder than anyone else's? But it's one thing to judge Sarah, who lived thousands of years ago, and to give her the benefit of the doubt. It's one thing to look at someone sitting across from us, someone we just met, and say, I'll give this person the benefit of the doubt. After all, is my blood any redder than his or hers? I've got good and bad in me as well. But when it comes to leading our country, we ought to hold our national figures to a higher bar. And so we ask the question, can we give them the benefit of the doubt just as much as we give individuals sitting across from us, just as much as we might give our matriarch Sarah? When we look at Bannon, when we look at Ellison, when we look at the other people on the left and the right, do we give them the benefit of the doubt and say, I'm sure they're nice people, they've just made some mistakes in their past? I would say no. We hold them to a higher bar. I was studying recently in the Talmud. And here I am on Masechet Gittin, on the tractate, interestingly enough, about divorces. And the rabbis in Masechet Gittin are talking about why the temple was destroyed. And one of the reasons they give is a man named Bar Kamsa. Now, Bar Kamsa was a problematic figure in Jewish history, and he lived about 2,000 years ago. And in this particular section of the Talmud, the rabbis come to tell us that Bar Kamsa was going about slandering the Jewish people to the Romans. Now, the Romans were in charge. The Romans were the all-powerful army. And the Jews were still holding on to some control in the Promised Land, and the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, was still standing. Nevertheless, Bar Kamsa was going around to the Roman authorities and even to Caesar himself and slandering the Jewish people, saying the Jews hate the Romans, they don't like the Romans. If the Jews could reject anything, they would reject the Romans right away. Bar Kamsa was slandering his own people, the Jews, over and over again to the Romans. And so the rabbis come together and they want to put Bar Kamsa into the death penalty. They want to kill him for his slander. And a leading rabbi of the day, Rabbi Zechariah, came forward and said, no, he hasn't done anything deserving of the death penalty. You can't kill him. Sure enough, because of the slander of Bar Kamsa, the Romans came into Jerusalem, saw what Bar Kamsa had been slandering the Jews about, saw it even though it didn't entirely exist in the way Bar Kamsa was saying it. And because of the actions of Bar Kamsa, because of his words, because of Bar Kamsa's words, the Romans came in, destroyed the Holy Temple, and ultimately evicted the Jewish people from Jerusalem and from much of the land of Israel. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai comes to say after the fact that Bar Kamsa and his words resulted in the death of thousands upon thousands of Jewish people. When it comes to the matter of saving a life, when it comes to this sort of behavior from leaders, we cannot tolerate hatred. We cannot tolerate negativity in words. We cannot tolerate one who slanders another, and especially one who slanders an entire group of people. So that brings us up back to Bannon. And it brings us back to Ellison. What do we do with these people? And here's my suggestion. Those of you who lean to the right, yes, Bannon is pro-Israel, it seems. And Bannon is probably not anti-Semitic. There's a good compliment to cast against somebody. They're probably not anti-Semitic. Those of you on the right, support others. Go to those on the right who are in leadership positions and say, we understand why you want Bannon, but we need somebody who is more of a statesman than this. And I'll encourage you who are on the left to go to others who are on the left, to go to the leadership of the left, and to say, yes, Ellison may have apologized for his Nation of Islam backing, but he continues to vote over and over again against Israel. We need someone who is more of a statesman than Keith Ellison. Let's look for someone else. Friends, we live in difficult times. There are battles raging across our country. We cannot support somebody who is pro-Israel, but who gives voice to racism, to misogyny, to homophobia. Because while the Jews today might not be the canaries in the coal mine, those groups are. And when the right comes after the homosexuals, when the right comes after women, when the right comes after minorities, guess what? We're next. And let's not forget it. And when we look to the left, while someone may support the rights of women, and someone may support the rights of gays and lesbians, and someone may support the rights of minorities, if they unfairly single out the state of Israel, if they unfairly look at Israel and judge it in a very different way, one that it even should be judged, but let alone differently than how they're judging other countries in this world, let's not forget that anti-Zionism is often code for anti-Semitism. Friends, we need statesmen. We need people who will support the state of Israel and who will support the rights of gays and lesbians, women, and other minorities. We also need to choose our words carefully. Because like Bar Kamsa, if we go around slandering entire groups of people, we will be responsible for bringing down our own people and our own country. Let's stop slinging the hate. Let's stop slinging the negative rhetoric. Let's stop accusing all the left or all the right of one thing or another. Let's show our leaders across the country what it means to be mensches, what it means to conduct our conversations in righteousness, what it means to take on those that we don't like with words of holiness rather than words of violence and anger. We live in difficult times. It's hard to judge, but we as Jews have an obligation to be an Or LaGoyim, to be a light unto the nations, and to show everybody in our country how to speak with each other and with those with whom we disagree, with respect, with dignity, with passion, and with righteousness. We cannot tolerate what is happening anymore. On this Shabbat of Parashat Hayyei Sarah, may God bless us with the strength and the wisdom to judge wisely and to choose each and every day words of holiness. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. And let us say together.